December 1944. The snow fell thick and heavy across the Ardennes Forest in Belgium. Each flake added to the white blanket that covered the ground 3 feet deep. The cold cut through every layer of clothing the soldiers wore. This was the coldest winter Europe had seen in 50 years. Temperatures dropped to 15 degrees below zero at night. Men huddled around fires made from broken furniture and tree branches, trying to stay alive. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood outside the Canvasfield hospital tent, watching her breath turn to fog in the frozen air. She was 28 years old, a nurse from Pennsylvania who had volunteered 2 years earlier. Her hands were red and raw from the cold, despite her wool gloves. Inside the tent, 47 wounded American soldiers lay on cots, waiting for treatment. Some had been there for 3 days. The hospital sat just 3 miles behind the Allied front lines, close enough that Sarah could hear the distant boom of artillery fire every few minutes. Lieutenant Mary O'Brien worked beside Sarah. She was 24, from Boston. With dark hair she kept tied back in a tight bun. Mary had joined the Army Nurse Corps right after Pearl Harbor. Now she stood counting their medical supplies for the 3rd time that day, hoping the numbers would somehow change. They had 23 doses of morphine left. The penicillin was almost gone. They were reusing bandages after boiling them in water heated over a small stove. The stove itself only worked half the time. The war had turned desperate. Everyone knew it. Adolf Hitler had thrown everything he had left into one final attack. 250,000 German troops pushed through the forest, trying to split the Allied forces in half. Many of these German soldiers were just boys. The Hitlerjugend, they called them. Hitler Youth. Some were only 14 years old. They had been raised on Nazi propaganda since they could walk. Now they carried rifles bigger than they were and marched toward American positions through the snow. Sarah and Mary had been at this field hospital for 6 weeks. They treated everything. Bullet wounds, shrapnel injuries, frostbite so bad that toes and fingers turned black and had to be cut off. Burns from exploding tanks. They worked 18-hour shifts. They ate cold rations. They slept 4 hours a night on thin cots in a separate tent that offered little protection from the wind. But they kept working because the wounded kept coming. On December 19th, everything changed. Sarah was wrapping a soldier's leg wound when she heard trucks approaching. Lots of them. The sound was different from American vehicles. Heavier, slower. Through the tent flap, she saw German military trucks rolling into their camp. Soldiers in grey uniforms jumped out, rifles ready. Her heart jumped into her throat. The capture happened fast. German soldiers surrounded the hospital tent. An officer shouted orders in German. Sarah understood none of it. Mary grabbed her hand and squeezed tight. 11 nurses total worked at this field hospital. Now they all stood together, hands raised as German soldiers searched the tents. The wounded American soldiers on the cots watched in horror. Some tried to sit up. Some reached for weapons they no longer had. A German officer spoke to them in broken English. He was tall, maybe 50 years old, with tired eyes. He told them they were prisoners of war. They would be treated according to the Geneva Convention. They would not be harmed. Sarah wanted to believe him. The propaganda posters back home showed Germans as monsters, savage beasts who tortured prisoners. But this man's voice sounded almost apologetic. They were loaded into the back of a covered truck. The 11 nurses sat on wooden benches as the truck drove east into Germany. The ride lasted 4 hours. Nobody spoke. Sarah's mind raced. What would happen to them? Would they be interrogated, forced to work in factories? She had heard stories about female prisoners, stories that made her stomach turn. Mary sat beside her, pale and shaking. The truck finally stopped in the town of Prüm, Germany. The nurses were led into a large stone building that had once been a school. Now it served as a German military hospital. The hallways smelled of antiseptic and something else, something rotten underneath. The building was freezing. Sarah could see her breath indoors. A German doctor met them in the main hall. He wore a white coat over his Wehrmacht uniform. His name tag read Dr. Heinrich Becker. He was perhaps 45, with grey hair at his temples and deep lines around his eyes. He studied the American nurses for a long moment. Then he spoke in perfect English. "I am a pediatric surgeon," he said. "Before this war, I worked at a children's hospital in Munich. Now I work here." He paused. His jaw tightened. "I need to show you something. Please follow me." He led them down a corridor. Their boots echoed on the stone floor. Sarah noticed how empty the hospital seemed. Where were all the staff? Where were the supplies? They passed rooms full of wounded German soldiers, young men with bandaged heads, missing limbs, faces twisted in pain. The rooms were crowded. 3 or 4 men to a bed meant for one. Dr. Becker stopped at a door marked with a C, Ward C. He turned to face the nurses. His expression was hard to read. Sad, determined, maybe both. "Inside this room are 47 patients," he said. "They need constant care. We have only 3 doctors for 340 wounded men in this entire facility. We cannot give these patients the attention they require." He opened the door. Sarah stepped inside and stopped. Her breath caught. The room was full of children, boys. Some looked 13, maybe 14 or 15 at most. They lay in metal beds, 2 to a bed in some cases. Bandages covered their bodies. Some were missing arms or legs. Their faces were pale, hollow. Several were crying quietly. "Doctor." Becker's voice came from behind her. "These are soldiers of the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, the Hitler Youth. They were sent into battle 3 weeks ago. This is what came back." Sarah felt Mary's hand grip her arm. The room spun slightly. These were enemy soldiers, children who had fought against American troops, children who might have killed American boys. But lying here in these beds, bandaged and broken, they just looked like children. Dr. Becker stepped forward. His voice dropped lower. "I am asking you, as one medical professional to another, to care for them. I know what I am asking. I know they are your enemy. But they are also patients, and they are children." He met Sarah's eyes. "Will you help them?" The question hung in the cold air. Outside, the war continued. Artillery boomed in the distance. But in this room, everything had changed. Sarah looked at the wounded boys. One of them, maybe 14, was watching her with wide, frightened eyes, waiting to see what the American nurse would do. Sarah made her decision in 3 seconds. She nodded to Dr. Becker. Mary and the other nurses followed her lead. What choice did they have? They were prisoners. But more than that, they were nurses. The Hippocratic Oath did not stop at national borders. At least, that is what Sarah told herself as she rolled up her sleeves. Dr. Becker showed them to a small washing area first. They scrubbed their hands with cold water and harsh soap. Then he led them back toward C. The wounded boys watched them enter, some with hope, some with fear, some with nothing in their eyes at all. Sarah approached the first bed. The boy in that bed could not have been more than 14. His name was Klaus, she learned later. Right now, he was just a patient. His left arm was gone, amputated at the shoulder. Bandages wrapped around his chest and stomach. His face was burned on one side. The skin looked red and raw. He stared at the ceiling, not blinking. Sarah touched his forehead. Fever, high fever, maybe 103 degrees. She looked around for medicine, for supplies, for anything. Dr. Becker showed them what they had to work with. The supply room was nearly empty. Shelves that should have held bandages and medicine were bare. They had enough gauze for maybe 3 days, if they used it carefully. The morphine supply sat in one small box. Sarah counted the doses. 42 doses for 47 patients. They would have to cut each dose into quarters. 1/4 dose of morphine did almost nothing for serious pain, but it was all they had. The bandages they did have were being reused. A German nurse showed them the process. Take the dirty bandage off a patient, boil it in water for 20 minutes, hang it to dry, use it again. Sarah had never done this before. In American field hospitals, they had fresh supplies delivered every week. Boxes and boxes of clean white bandages, bottles of morphine, penicillin. sulfur powder. Here, they were washing blood out of bandages and using them again. The temperature in Ward C stayed at 48 degrees. Sarah could see her breath when she exhaled. The stone walls held the cold like a freezer. The boys had blankets, but not enough. 6 thin wool blankets for 47 patients. Some boys shared blankets. Others shivered without any covering at all. Sarah gave her own coat to a boy whose legs had been amputated. He was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. The coat did not help much, but it was something. Food arrived at noon. A German orderly brought in a large pot of soup and a basket of bread. Sarah watched as he ladled the soup into bowls. The liquid was thin, mostly water, with a few pieces of potato floating in it, maybe some onion. The bread was dark and heavy. Each boy got one slice. Sarah weighed a slice in her hand, about 310 grams, less than 3/4 of a pound. This was their meal for the day. One bowl of watery soup, one slice of bread. Mary whispered to Sarah, "This is what they are feeding their wounded soldiers? Their children?" Sarah had no answer. In the American camps, soldiers got 3 full meals a day. Hot meals, meat, vegetables, fresh bread, coffee, sometimes even dessert. The contrast hit her like a punch to the stomach. Germany was starving. Not just the prisoners of war, not just the civilians, even their own wounded soldiers were starving. Dr. Becker brought them ersatz coffee in the afternoon. Ersatz meant fake, substitute. This coffee was made from roasted acorns. It tasted like dirt and bitterness. But it was hot, and that mattered. He poured Sarah a cup with shaking hands. "I apologize for the quality," he said. "Real coffee has not been available for 2 years." Sarah sipped the awful drink and studied Dr. Becker. He looked exhausted. His uniform hung loose on his frame. He had lost weight, probably a lot of weight. His hands trembled slightly. Malnutrition, Sarah thought. Even the doctors were not getting enough food. That night, Dr. Becker showed them where they would sleep. He gave them his own quarters, a small room with 2 beds and a tiny stove. The room was maybe 5 degrees warmer than the rest of the building. 53 degrees instead of 48. Dr. Becker said he would sleep in the staff room with the other doctors. Sarah tried to refuse. He insisted. "You are my guests," he said, "and you are caring for patients I cannot care for. It is the least I can do." The kindness confused Sarah. This was the enemy, the Nazis, the people who started this war, the people who built concentration camps and murdered millions. Yet here was this doctor, starving and freezing, giving them his own bed and his own portion of fake coffee. It did not fit the story she had been told. Over the next 3 days, Sarah and the other nurses learned the boys' stories. Some spoke broken English, others used hand gestures and drawings. One boy named Friedrich was 15. His parents died in an Allied bombing raid on Hamburg in 1943. The bombs destroyed his apartment building. He was at school when it happened. He came home to rubble and bodies. The Hitler Youth took him in, fed him, gave him a uniform, told him he could fight for Germany and avenge his parents. So he did. Now he lay in bed with shrapnel in his spine. He might never walk again. Another boy, Otto, was 13. He looked even younger, maybe 11. He joined the Hitler Youth because they promised 3 meals a day. His family was starving. His little sister was sick. The youth gave him food and he brought some home to her. Then they sent him to the front. He did not understand why. He thought he would just march in parades and sing songs. Instead, he ended up in a tank that got hit by American artillery. His best friend burned to death right next to him. Otto survived with burns covering his arms and chest. At night, the boys cried. Sarah heard them as she tried to sleep in Dr. Becker's cold room. They called for their mothers. "Mutter," they sobbed. "Mutter, hilf mir, mother, help me." The words were German, but the pain sounded exactly the same as the American soldiers Sarah had treated. Grief had no language, fear had no nationality. Some of the boys still believed in Hitler. They talked about how Germany would win, how secret weapons would destroy the Allies, how the Führer had a plan. Their eyes shone when they spoke of victory. But others had stopped believing. Sarah saw it in their faces, the doubt, the questions they were afraid to ask out loud. One boy whispered to Mary, "Will the Americans shoot us when they come, because we fought against them?" Mary did not know how to answer. She held the boy's hand instead. Dr. Becker pulled Sarah aside on the fourth day. They stood in the cold hallway outside Ward C. He looked at her with those tired eyes. "I must ask you something difficult," he said. "Can you see them as children first and enemies second? Because we no longer have that luxury. We cannot afford to see them as anything but soldiers. We need them back in battle. But you might still have that choice." Sarah thought about his question. She thought about Klaus with his missing arm, about Friedrich who would never walk, about Otto who watched his friend burn, about all 47 boys who should be in school, not in a hospital bed with combat wounds. "They are children," Sarah said finally. "That is what I see." "Doctor." Becker nodded slowly. Something like relief crossed his face. Or maybe it was grief, maybe both. That night, Sarah wrote in a small notebook she had hidden in her bag. The notebook had survived the capture. She wrote by candlelight while Mary slept. They call for their mothers in their sleep, in German. "But it sounds exactly like our boys. How is that possible? How can the enemies sound just like us when they cry?" Christmas Eve arrived on December 24th. Sarah had lost track of the days until Mary reminded her that morning. Christmas. The word felt strange in this place. In this cold German hospital full of wounded children who had tried to kill American soldiers just weeks ago, Sarah wondered what her family was doing back in Pennsylvania. Probably sitting around a warm fire, eating turkey and potatoes, singing carols, safe. Here in Ward C, there would be no celebration, no tree, no presents, no special meal. The boys would get their usual watery soup and slice of dark bread. They would lie in their cold beds and hurt, and maybe cry when they thought no one was listening. That was Christmas in a German military hospital in 1944. Sarah was changing Klaus's bandages when he spoke to her. Klaus was the 14-year-old boy with the missing arm and the burned face. He had been quiet for days, barely ate, barely moved. Now he looked up at Sarah with his one good eye. The other eye was covered with gauze. "Do you hate me?" he asked in broken English. "For what we did to you?" The question stopped Sarah's hands. She held a roll of clean bandage, frozen in place. The words hung in the air between them like the fog of their breath in the cold room. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked quietly. Klaus's voice was small, thin, like it might break if he pushed too hard. We were enemy. German soldiers, we fight American soldiers, we kill some. Maybe. I do not know. I was in tank. Tank shoot at Americans. Now you are prisoner. You must take care of us. Do you hate this? Do you hate me? Sarah sat down on the edge of his bed. She looked at his face. Half of it was red and scarred from burns. The other half still looked like a child, a scared child. She thought about her answer carefully. "No," she said, "I do not hate you." "Why not?" Klaus asked. Tears formed in his good eye. "I would hate me if I was you." Sarah did not have a good answer, not one that made sense. She had been trained to see Germans as the enemy, as evil, as monsters who needed to be destroyed. But Klaus was not a monster. He was a boy who had been burned and cut and broken by a war he did not start. A war that began when he was only 5 years old. "How old were you when the war started?" Sarah asked. Klaus thought for a moment. 5, maybe 6. I do not remember time before war. Sarah did the math in her head. Klaus was born in 1930 or 31. Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933. Klaus had lived his entire life under Nazi rule. Every day of school, every radio program, every poster on every wall. Everything told him the same story. Germany is great. The Führer is wise. Jews are evil. America is the enemy. He had never heard a different story, never had a chance to think his own thoughts. "You were a child," Sarah said. You did not choose this war. But I chose to fight, Klaus said. His voice broke. They said it was honor. They said we defend fatherland. They said we are heroes. He paused. I think maybe they lied. That night, Sarah talked with the other boys. Some still believed in Hitler. They said Germany would win. They said the Führer had secret plans. But others were starting to doubt, starting to wonder, starting to ask questions they had been too afraid to ask before. A boy named Wilhelm told Sarah he joined the Hitler Youth because his family was starving. The youth gave members extra food rations, 400 grams of bread instead of 300, an extra cup of soup. For his mother and little sisters, he would have done anything. So he joined. He marched in parades. He sang the songs. He raised his arm in salute. And then one day they gave him a rifle and put him on a train to the front. He was 14 years old. Another boy named Dieter said he did not even know what they were fighting for anymore. They say we fight for Germany, he told Mary through a translator. But what is Germany? My city is destroyed. My school is rubble. My father is dead. My brother is missing. We have no food, no fuel, no hope. What are we defending? There is nothing left. Sarah wrote in her notebook that night by candlelight. Her fingers were stiff from the cold. She had to stop every few minutes to blow on them. But she needed to write this down, needed to remember. We came here believing we were fighting monsters, she wrote. The propaganda posters showed Germans with fangs, with evil eyes, with blood on their hands. We were told they wanted to destroy democracy, destroy freedom, destroy everything good in the world. And maybe some of that is true. Maybe the Nazi leaders are monsters. But in Ward C, I am bandaging the wounds of children who have been turned into soldiers by monsters. There is a difference, one I was not prepared for. She paused, thinking. Then she continued writing. These boys were born into a world already at war, or a world preparing for war. They never had a choice. The propaganda started when they could barely read. Every book, every lesson, every song, all of it designed to make them into perfect little Nazis, perfect little soldiers. And it worked, until they actually went to war, until they saw their friends die, until they ended up here, broken and scared and starting to wonder if everything they were taught was a lie. Dr. Becker found Sarah in the hallway the next morning, Christmas morning. He looked even more tired than usual. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes were red. I want to tell you something, he said. Before the war, I was a pediatric surgeon in Munich. I worked at a children's hospital. I fixed broken bones. I removed tumors. I saved lives. That was my job, to save children. His voice got rough. Now my job is to patch up children just enough to send them back to die. Do you understand what that does to a person? To know you are healing them so they can be killed? Sarah nodded. She understood. I made this request to you for a reason, Dr. Becker continued. If kindness survives this war anywhere, it must survive here, in how we treat each other's children. Otherwise, what are we fighting for? Just more death? More hatred? That cannot be all there is. That afternoon, Mary had an idea. She gathered the nurses and some of the boys who could sit up. She taught them a song, Silent Night. Most of the boys already knew it in German. Still Nacht. Mary taught them the English words. She wrote them out on paper. The boys practiced slowly. On Christmas evening, as the sun set and the cold grew even deeper, they sang, some in English, some in German, some switching between both languages. The words mixed together in the freezing air of Ward C, Silent Night, Holy Night, Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. All is calm, all is bright. Alles schläft, einsam wacht. Sarah listened to the voices. American nurses and German child soldiers singing the same song in different languages. She thought about what that meant. The same prayer, the same hope for peace. The same God, maybe, listening to both sides, ask for help. Klaus called Sarah over after the singing ended. He had something in his hand, a small notebook, the kind students used in school. He had been drawing in it, simple pencil drawings. He showed her a picture. It was Sarah, standing next to his bed, changing his bandages. He had drawn her face carefully, kindly. At the bottom of the page, he had written in German. Sarah asked Dr. Becker to translate. Danke für Ihre Menschlichkeit, Dr. Becker read. Thank you for your humanity. Klaus tore the page out and gave it to Sarah. She folded it carefully and put it in her notebook. She knew she would keep it forever. That night, Sarah wrote one more entry. Ward C taught me something the war tried to erase. That humanity exists even in the enemy, especially in those too young to have chosen their side. I do not know if this makes me a traitor to my country. I do not know if I will get in trouble for feeling this way. But I know it is true. I know it in my bones. These boys are not monsters. They are victims. And if I forget that, if I let hatred win, then what was the point of any of this? May 7th, 1945. Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Sarah heard the news from a British soldier who came to liberate the hospital in Prüm. Allied forces had pushed through Germany, found the camps, found the hospitals, found the prisoners. Sarah and the other 10 nurses were officially free. Sarah looked back at Ward C one last time before she left. Most of the boys were still there, still wounded, still waiting to heal. Klaus sat up in his bed and watched her go. He raised his remaining arm in a small wave. Not a Nazi salute, just a wave, just goodbye. Sarah waved back. She wondered if she would ever see him again. Probably not. He was the enemy, after all. This was just a strange moment in a terrible war. Soon it would be over and forgotten. But Sarah knew she would never forget. The journey home took 2 months. First, to a processing center in France, then to England, then finally on a ship across the Atlantic Ocean. Sarah stood on the deck and watched the Statue of Liberty appear through the fog. New York City, home, America. She should have felt joy, relief. Instead, she felt confused, like she was caught between 2 worlds and did not belong in either one. Fort Dix, New Jersey, July 1945. Sarah and the other nurses arrived at the military base for debriefing. Officers asked them questions. What did you see? How were you treated? Did you give the enemy any information? Sarah answered honestly. They treated us well. They asked us to care for wounded children. We did our jobs as nurses. The officers wrote notes, nodded, moved on to the next question. The newspapers called them heroes, captured nurses who survived Nazi imprisonment. Their pictures appeared in papers across the country. People recognized Sarah on the street, shook her hand, thanked her for her service. A woman in Philadelphia gave her flowers. A man bought her dinner. Everyone wanted to hear her story. But when Sarah told them the truth, their faces changed. She mentioned the German boys, the child soldiers, how young they were, how scared, how some of them had been orphaned by Allied bombs. How they cried for their mothers at night in German, but it sounded just like American boys crying. The smiles faded. People got uncomfortable. One man called her a Nazi sympathizer, said she should be ashamed, said those German boys got what they deserved. Sarah tried to explain, tried to help him understand. But he walked away, left his coffee sitting on the counter and walked out of the diner. Mary had similar experiences. She stopped talking about Ward C, stopped mentioning the boys. When people asked about her time as a prisoner, she kept it simple. They treated us according to the Geneva Convention, she said. Nothing more. It was easier that way. But Sarah could not stop thinking about it, could not stop seeing Klaus's face, Friedrich's missing legs, Otto's burned arms, Wilhelm's hollow eyes, Dieter's questions about what they were even fighting for. She visited veterans' hospitals, talked with American soldiers who had been wounded. They were young too, 18, 19, 20 years old. Some were younger. She met a boy from Ohio who lied about his age and enlisted at 16. He lost both legs to a German landmine. He cried at night, called for his mother. The nurses said he had nightmares, woke up screaming. Sarah realized something sitting next to his bed. This boy and Klaus were not different. Same age, same fear, same pain, different uniforms, but the same war had broken them both. The war did not care which side you fought for. It destroyed everyone the same way. The years passed. Sarah kept nursing, got married to a teacher named Robert in 1947. They had 2 children, a girl and a boy. Sarah never stopped thinking about Ward C, about the boys, about what happened there in that freezing hospital in Germany. In 1950, Sarah saw an article in the newspaper. Germany was rebuilding. The Marshall Plan was sending aid. American money was helping reconstruct the cities that American bombs had destroyed. Sarah thought about Prüm, about the hospital, about Dr. Becker, about Klaus. She talked to Robert, told him she wanted to go back, wanted to see what happened to the boys. Robert did not understand at first. Why would she want to visit the enemy? But Sarah explained, they were not the enemy anymore. The war was over. They were just people now, just survivors trying to rebuild their lives. Robert agreed. They saved money, bought tickets. In October 1950, Sarah returned to Germany. Prüm looked different. The hospital was still there, but it was a school again. Children sat in classrooms where wounded soldiers once lay. The war felt like a distant memory here, like something that happened long ago to different people. Sarah asked about Dr. Becker. A teacher told her he had died in 1947. Malnutrition and exhaustion, they said. He never recovered from the war. Sarah stood in the building's courtyard and cried for a man she had known for only 3 months. A man who gave her his bed and his coffee and asked her to remember her humanity. She asked about the boys from Ward C. Most were dead, killed in the final months of the war or died from their injuries after. But someone remembered Klaus. He had survived, moved to Hamburg, was studying at the university there. Sarah took a train to Hamburg. The city was still rebuilding. Piles of rubble sat on street corners, buildings with missing walls. But life continued. People walked to work. Children played in the streets. The world kept turning. She found Klaus at the University of Hamburg Medical School. He was 20 years old now, tall, thin. His face still showed the burn scars. His left sleeve hung empty where his arm should have been. But he was alive. He was studying. He was moving forward. Klaus recognized her immediately. His eyes went wide. "Nurse Sarah," he said in English, much better English than before. They sat in a cafe, drank real coffee, not the ersatz kind made from acorns, real coffee with real cream and real sugar. Klaus told her his story. After the war, he had nowhere to go. His family was gone. His city was destroyed. But he remembered Ward C, remembered Sarah changing his bandages, remembered her kindness when she had every reason to hate him. "You showed me something," Klaus said. "You showed me that healing is stronger than hatred, that people can choose kindness even when everything tells them not to." He paused, sipped his coffee. "That is what I learned as a prisoner of war in my own country's hospital, from an enemy nurse. I decided I wanted to do the same, so I am becoming a doctor, a pediatric surgeon. Like Dr. Becker." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. She reached across the table and squeezed Klaus's remaining hand. "He would be proud of you," she said. "I hope so," Klaus replied. "I hope I can help children the way you helped me, even when it is hard, even when people do not understand." Sarah returned to America, went back to her family, back to her nursing job. But something had changed inside her. She understood her purpose now, understood what Ward C had taught her. In 1967, Sarah was invited to speak at a nursing school in Philadelphia. Young women sat in rows, notebooks open, ready to learn. Sarah stood at the podium and looked at their faces. So young, so hopeful, so sure the world was simple and good and evil were easy to spot. She told them the story, all of it. Ward C, the boys, Dr. Becker, Klaus, the choice she made on December 19th, 1944. "The hardest thing I ever did was not surviving capture," Sarah said. It was choosing to see children where I was trained to see enemies. The German doctor did not ask us to betray our country. He asked us to remember our profession. In Ward C, we were not American and German. We were nurses and patients, healers and children who needed healing. She paused. The room was silent. That is what I learned in captivity, Sarah continued. The values we fight for only matter if we are willing to extend them to those who do not deserve them, because that is what makes them values. Not just convenient slogans we use when it is easy. A student raised her hand. But they were Nazis, she said. They were evil. Sarah nodded. Some were. The leaders, yes. The men who started the war and built the death camps and murdered millions. They were evil. But the 14-year-old boy with the missing arm who cried for his mother at night, was he evil or was he a victim of evil? There is a difference. And if we cannot see that difference, then we lose our humanity. We become the thing we are fighting against. The students wrote notes. Some nodded, some looked confused. Sarah did not expect them all to understand. She had lived it, and she barely understood it herself. But she knew one thing for certain. In Ward C, on that freezing Christmas Eve in 1944, humanity won. Not America, not Germany, just humanity. The simple act of caring for someone who needed care. And that victory mattered more than any battle. That was the real freedom. Choosing compassion when everything told you not to. Seeing a person where others saw only an enemy. That was what made the difference between being a prisoner of war and being truly free.